I went to go see Steven Spielberg's new movie, The Post, today, and I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on the film here on this World of Geekdom review. Now, when it comes to Steven Spielberg movies, I mean, very few directors have the kind of experience and resume that he has, but not every movie he's done is a hit. But with this movie in particular, he has Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep attached to the film, and that could do nothing but help. So, this movie is based on a true story inspired by actual events of an incident that happened in the 1970s involving the Washington Post. Now, going into this movie, I'll be honest, I didn't know if I was going to like this movie because, you know, a movie about a newspaper, it's one of those things where it just doesn't seem that interesting on the surface, right? Like, you know, I'm usually more of a fan of other genres than just political dramas. I'm not really big on political dramas. It's not my favorite kind of movie. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, for the first half of this film, I had trouble getting into the movie. I was watching it. I was enjoying the performances. Tom Hanks is always good in pretty much everything he does. I mean, you know, maybe not everything, but most of the stuff he does. He plays Ben Bradley. And in the movie, what I liked is that because Tom Hanks is getting older now, he's really portraying these kind of rougher, gruffy characters. So in the movie, he's got that older kind of grovelly voice, you know, and that kind of really helped. And then you have Meryl Streep as Kay Graham, who is the owner of the Washington Post, or at least she was back then. And of course, she would inherit that from her family, which does become a plot point in the film. These are real people and a real incident that happened. And I'll be honest, going into the movie, I didn't really know much about the history of the Washington Post, so I kind of went into it with an open mind, just trying to learn as much as I could, because newspapers seem like such a thing of the past with the digital era that we live in now, but the story still had elements that made it really interesting and very fascinating, and by the time the second half of the movie kicks off, I was invested. The first half, in my opinion, did drag a bit, but the second half I thought was very, very good, and a very good heroic story. There's actually some heroism here, specifically with Kay, you know, and her character and the decisions that she has to make, because the thing about the movie, the themes that it explores, even though it takes place in the 1970s for the most part, the movie explores issues that we deal with today. I usually stay away from talking about politics, but because this is a political drama, this has to be somewhat discussed in my opinion. And the whole story behind it is the connection between the government and the press. And there's tons of conspiracy theories and tons of talk recently in the past few years about this, about how much control does the government have or should the government have over the free press, because the First Amendment gives the press the right to, well, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth if they can. And the thing about the film is that the whole sort of journalistic aspect of the film, the rivalry between the two newspapers, the Washington Post and the New York Times, which is definitely a major plot point in the film. It's not the main plot, but it is a major plot point, and it does tie into the beginning, middle, and end of the story. That's not really what the movie was about. The movie's really about making tough decisions when adversity is put upon you, specifically with the characters portrayed by Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep. And coming from somebody who, you know, me, who on my other channel, Geekdom 101, I'm pretty well known as being a credible source of news for the Dragon Ball fandom. That's kind of how I built my name, is trying to build it on credibility and a connection with my audience and not lying to them or misleading them like so many other people had done before me. I kind of resonate with this film in a way because it really brings up a lot of issues that we face when it comes to bringing news to people. And obviously, the Dragon Ball stuff is crap compared to the actual Vietnam War and the real life issues that this movie addresses, but the main story is about information, the spread of information, and whether or not, just because the government has power, if you should submit to that power to protect what's in their interest or in the interest of the general public. Both newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post, find out that the government's been lying to the public for several years and several different terms, and the big obstacle in the film becomes whether or not they should publish these secrets, because the New York Times tried to do it, and essentially what happens is the government pretty much bullied them because they were giving away top secret information that exposed the government lying to the public. So you're faced with this sort of morality puzzle where Meryl Streep's character Kay knows that if she goes public with this information, her and Tom Hanks, as Ben Bradley, if they go public with this information, it could not only harm the Post and hurt the Post as a newspaper, but they could both end up being held in contempt and sent to prison. And the beginning of the movie really establishes why these stakes are so high. Kay's Washington Post newspaper had pretty much just gone public. It had an IPO. It was growing. It was getting bigger. And she has tons and tons of employees beneath her that she's responsible for. So it's not just a personal responsibility as in, oh crap, I don't know if I want to go to prison or not. It's also a responsibility to the newspaper and to the employees, because if the newspaper goes belly up and the investors that first came into that IPO leave, the paper's done for and it's going to put people out of work. But is that sacrifice, is that risk worth taking to give the truth to the American public? And the fact is it was, because, well, this is based on a true story and we kind of know what happens. This is a very interesting film to be released during this time because, like I said earlier, with all the talk of WikiLeaks and fake news and the way that news is kind of out there now in the modern era, because nowadays news travels so fast that you don't really have time to sit back and think about this. But in the movie, they have a short amount of time, but enough time to actually come up with a resolution, and it really shows the growth of Kay Graham as a person. And I think Meryl Streep's performance was really good because nowhere in this movie is she too abrasive, nowhere is she too, she's not acting like she's overly confused and, she doesn't have the puppy eyes, that she doesn't know what she's doing. She knows what she's doing, but she actually comes off like a character who is thinking about the repercussions of her actions, not just for her, but for others. And to me, that was a great performance by Meryl Streep, nailing this. And of course, if you follow history, you know the gamble paid off, because if it wasn't for this situation, this scandal, then you know that the Washington Post would be a small sort of local newspaper, and this is the story that really made the Washington Post a big deal. So she would take the company that her family sort of founded and took it to new levels and new heights, all because of this scandal and because of her willingness to do the right thing. There's actually a scene in the film that I thought was really interesting where she's walking down these stairs, and the way that Steven Spielberg kind of shot this, you see several women like looking at her, smiling at her in awe. So this whole idea of having, strong women in movies, it's been talked about to death. Star Wars is doing it, Marvel's doing it, about having strong female leads and, good inspirational female characters. There was a scene in the movie that I thought was totally telling the audience this, but to me this is even more impactful because now we're talking about the fate of an entire company, of several people's lives that were in a way gambled, but she believed in the integrity of the newspaper and in her own personal integrity, that even though the government is this scary thing to go against, even though this is a large, imposing figure, the people deserve the truth. They should not be lied to. And even though there's tons of, as you know, nowadays, especially clickbait, misinformation, fake news, whatever you want to call it, this movie did remind me that the truth is the most important thing. And I really hope people go out there and they see this film and they understand why that is the case. Also, in addition to just Hanks and Meryl Streep's really, really strong performances portraying two really, really strong people, I got to talk about Bob Odenkirk. Great job. Another guy who stuck to his guns, old school freaking newspaper, journalist, old school guy, and again, a person with integrity. And that to me seems to be the big message of this film, is that you can always have integrity even when you're being faced with a possible adversary that is, of course, the federal government. And I did like how the film really pushed the idea of a democracy. The government seemed to be unbeatable, but because we had the judicial system, everything kind of evened out and was fair play. Overall, though, very good movie. The first half of it does tend to drag a little bit, and I did not get into it. I'm watching it, and it just didn't really work for me, but the second half was so good that it kind of made me remember the first half and remember what, clues were given to us in the plot then that would kind of lead up to, and not just that, but also character moments that would lead up to the eventual, important stuff which came in the second half. So again, this was a good movie. I had a good time watching it, and I thought for a movie that's completely outside the kind of movies that I personally enjoy, I thought it was a fine movie. I mean, really, I'm happy that I went to go see it, and I feel like I did not waste my time. So check it out. Thank you so very much for checking out the review. Leave comments down below if you saw it, and I will talk to y'all soon.